So, welcome everybody to a special episode of the Way to College podcast live, navigating the college application process. We are now in that time of the year where seniors should absolutely be working on their college applications. Parents should be thinking about helping, how they can help, how can they can best
Mhm.
support them. And so we wanted to organize this talk for parents, for seniors, particularly for those who maybe haven't gotten started, maybe are lost and really don't know where to start. And so we're going to do our best to walk through the process and talk about some of the most important things students should think about as they work on their college applications. Joining me today is a special guest, and I'm going to let Aimee introduce herself. So, Aimee, why don't you introduce yourself to our everyone out there?
Sure, thank you. Hello, my name is Aimee Nunez, or as my mom would say, it's Aimee. Um, always correcting me. I love her. I am a college specialist. My students also like to call me their college coach. So I've been doing college coaching slash college counseling for many years now. I work in public schools in this role, and I also help students outside of my campus or outside of my district as well. Um, so with me, and I think I'll dive right into this if we're good. For me, this whole path started 24 years ago. I was a high school senior with no idea how to do any of the college application process. Now we are talking before the internet was a baby, so everything was still paper based. And so I had to get my hands on actual paper applications, fill those out, mail them in, and the same with financial aid. But we're talking about a high school senior, first gen college, going, right. I was going to be the first in my family to go. Um, my parents wanted the best for me, always encouraged me, said education was not an option. Like it was not optional. I was going to go to college and we were just going to figure it out. Right. And so that's what I did. I figured out what I could. My mom was in there with me, like we're just rolling with it. And now reflecting on that, I could say it would have been really nice to have some resources, to have the internet, to have places just to go find some information, because I was at a really large high school. And so my counselors had hundreds of students in their caseload. And so I just really didn't know how to start and who to ask, where to go. And so, the universe allowed me, I still made it through. I went to college, I finished, right? I went back and got a master's later. So at the end of the day, I met that goal. But there could be a slightly easier way, I would say, right? Like it, as long as you're informed. And I think that's where I like to reflect on my story and tell a little bit of, or share a little bit of that is, an informed high school senior just has such a smoother journey in the college application process versus a high school senior who doesn't have the resources or the information, right? And so that's why I love what I do, and that's why I do what I do. Um, Working in college admissions on the high school side is just a passion of mine. I just think about myself in those shoes and how every student deserves resources, and just so that's why I'm here, and I'm thankful I'm here, and thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining me. And I think, like you, I share a passion for this work. I was I was a student that I think was had access to resources, and I think more importantly had access to people. And so for me, I think on my end, um, that's not lost on me that I had access. And even then, it wasn't easy. It was a struggle. Um, and I had some key individuals in my life that knew what to ask, how to do it, right? The little ins and outs that I think I think at the time very few people knew how to do. And so for me, I certainly wouldn't be in the position that I'm in if not for a lot of help and for people looking out for me and giving me access to resources and then giving me the know-how. And so this work is also equally important to me. So thank you, Aimee, for joining me. Now, Aimee, we before we started, we jumped on and we were talking about sort of where students are at, and I shared that I'd spoken to some seniors and that a lot of them seem lost and already, I think, a little overwhelmed because very few of them had gotten started on their application process. And so I think let's take this approach where we're a senior or maybe parents of seniors and we're just getting started. Where do we start?
Right. Where do we go? What do I do? Right. It's like all the big questions. And where do we start? I really like to talk about goals with students, with parents. What are your goals as a parent for your child? And then for the high school senior, what are your goals right now? Do you already have a college major in mind? Do you have a couple of dream schools in mind? Right. And so goals is such a great way to start the conversation because then it kind of lays out the pieces that are going to have to follow. So if a student has this goal of attending a college where they can go pre-med route, they're going to be a doctor, right? Wonderful. So let's start the work by researching colleges that offer an actual pre-med track, right? And then we can get the ball rolling. Or if so just depending on the goal, right? Like we can list all kinds of majors. But sometimes students are very interested in these like very specific programming or majors, and they're only offered at so many schools, right? So that can direct you in the right, guide you into the right direction at that point. But we also have high school seniors who are going to tell us what I would have said. I just want to go to college. Like I don't know. I just want to go to college, right? And so then we do start exploring interests, passions. When you do get involved at school, kind of where do you end up? When you do volunteer, what does that look like? What places are you going? Right. And so for myself, my story was if I were having this conversation with, an adult who was trying to help me, my story was I volunteer anywhere like with kids. So I was a high school senior volunteering at Boys and Girls Club doing tutoring, like with middle school students. Um, I did that during school as well. I remember being a middle school student myself and tutoring fellow students, right? So I always got involved in programs where I was helping other students. And so for me, the answer would have been, I want to go into education, right? And then that would have gotten me started on researching opportunities at universities that offered what I wanted. So always starting with the goal in mind or the end goal, or as far as the high school senior can see right now, really can help us get that going and headed in the right direction. Keeping in mind though, and I like to say this to parents, college freshmen can change their minds and they do it quite often. So if I had one major in mind, got into the college, started my first, second semester even, and decided to change my mind, it's not the end all. It's still early enough to do things like that as long as the student is seeking advising first, being supportive of what those goals are, even as they shift once they're in college. So where do I start? Talk goals. And then we kind of focus in from there.
I love that. I love that. And I absolutely agree. I think figuring out, okay, because you're right. And as you were talking, I was thinking about those students that are sort of already have a lot of self-direction. And so they've identified, right, that they're going to do pre-med or they've got a program specific in mind. But then those, like you said, that are just, I just want to go to college. I just want to go to school. And so helping them sort of identify and clarify maybe some of those goals. And even those that I just want to go to school, but maybe even having conversations. So for our parents that are listening, just having conversations about possible interests, like you said, your experience working at the Boys and Girls Club and sort of directed you following that path towards education. And then again, you're right. Most freshmen will change their minds and change their majors, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think starting from that position of what are my goals, maybe what are my interests at this point in my life. Okay, I love that. So we've identified our goals. We've had a good conversation about I want to do this, I want to do that. What comes next then, Aimee?
Gotcha. So at that point, we have to start exploring what is the college list going to look like. And it can seem like a daunting task, I think, at first when we don't know what we're looking for. But if we've already identified our goals, We already know what programs we're interested in, what majors we're interested in. And if the conversation went even further with family, you know where to look, right? So your family might be very open to the idea of you kind of traveling wherever. So you're able to look at schools outside of Texas, outside your state. Or after the conversation with family, everyone agrees that you're going to stay in your state for your undergrad. That could, so that's going to narrow down my search, right? So the more filters I have, within my own like college search here, that's going to narrow it down, make it seem less overwhelming. So one search engine that I like to use personally when I'm doing my research with a student is search engines like Big Future by College Board, right? So I can search universities and I can see all kinds of breakdowns about the university, including admissions, and I can see some data. So for parents who want to see numbers, you want to see the acceptance rate, you'd like to see how admitted students are scoring. That's where we can find some of that information. And that'll help students start to stack that college list into what looks like a balanced list. So key word there, balance, is I like to use that over and over when I'm talking with my students on how they're modifying their list. So depending on where I'm landing, then I start to understand those numbers, like if I'm on Big Future researching a university. So if I'm landing in the top 10% or the top quarter, anything like that, then I can start narrowing my search by schools that auto admit the top quarter in the state, right? Or the top 10% or whatever that number looks like. And I know that those schools are my assured admission, and I make sure I have a couple of those on my list, right? And they offer my program, and I can see myself, considering that school, strongly considering that school. Personally, as a college counselor working with families, I always have my students apply to their local university, whatever is closest, because that's just, we know what life is like, and sometimes life surprises us, and we want to make sure that we have that local university available as a viable option. So we build from there, right? So I need to understand where I land in terms of my GPA, my ranking, how I'm scoring on SATs or ACTs. And if I know where to find the data, like on Big Future, for example, then I can see where I compare with entering freshmen at those universities, and I can start to build a list reflective of the data and how I perform as a high school student. And then I can see balance. So if I can get 2 to 3 schools in every category, so to speak, I have a balanced list. So when I say categories, I'm talking about, for example, when I said assured admission, auto admit, those are like safety schools is what you hear them called, right? So I know I'm going to get in, and I want to make sure I have those in my pocket before I finish balancing out that list. I want those. And then I move up towards what you can call a target type of university. You're scoring as a student right there with entering freshmen, right? Your GPA is about there. Your scoring ACT, SAT is similar to those students. Then we know we're at about a target. Then we move up even further, and we can call these reach schools now. This is where the data is showing you that the acceptance rate is much smaller, and students who are admitted are typically scoring higher than you. And now we have a reach. And then what I like to call with my students, what we call a wild card, and they know what I mean when I'm like, there's too many wild cards on your list. These are like the less than 10% admissions rate. It doesn't matter if you score perfect scores, you may not get in anyway. And I'm talking like our Ivies. I'm talking about highly selective private colleges in our country. In Texas, we have the Ivy of the South. We have Rice, who is highly, highly selective. And so then we play with the word wild card. It's something I just stole educators. We kind of steal stuff from each other. And it's something I learned from another educator whose material and resources I love to look at. And that's just, it's stuck. And the kids just like really understand the difference between even a reach and a wild card, right? A wild card means you could be anybody. You could be the valedictorian of your class, and it's still a wild card. So as long as we see balance, I like to typically see 2 to 3 schools per category, just depending on the student's goals and the type of setting or program they're looking for. And so that's how I talk. That's what I mean when I talk about building the college list. So it's not just a list of like cool schools that are really interesting to me, but it is a list put together where you're factoring in really important information about yourself, including the data, your numbers, plus your interests, right? And so when we combine these, we're able to build this balanced list reflective of universities where you can actually imagine yourself at. And because we don't
I
want to
love
waste
that.
time during this process. Yeah, this process is time consuming. And so we don't want to waste time right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. No, no, no. I totally agree. And just to reiterate,
Mhm.
you know, I want to walk us back a little bit just to make sure, because I know it's a lot of information
It's a
we've
lot.
got. Yeah. And so just to
Yeah.
reiterate, right, as a family, sitting down and talking about, schools in the area, specific programs. Thank you for sharing Big Future. And what we'll do is when I post this, I'll make sure to add that as part of the notes. So all of these resources so that families can go back and then utilize these resources. But I love that, looking at the schools and looking at what does the data say, right? And do I fit? Am I my own record, my own profile consistent, right? So increase the likelihood that I might get in. And
Mhm.
then I love the suggestion, and I agree. If I work with students, creating a balanced list, right? So as you said, the assured admission or safety net schools, right? The schools that we know you're going to get into, our target schools with a similar demographic, similar sort of profile to your own. I love that you distinguish between the reach schools, so those that are just
Mhm.
outside maybe of our profile, and then the wild card schools, because you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. I used to I attended Stanford University, and I remember I used to offer tours, and we'd bring high school kids in from around the Bay Area and bring them into Stanford, and parents would always ask, like, what does my kid have to do? And one thing that they always asked us to tell parents was, Stanford denied kids with perfect SATs, with perfect ACTs, and so that there was no like real sort of profile. We would always say they want a really well-rounded student, and so students that were really active in a lot of things, good a lot of things academically, but that they just weren't in their room studying. And so I think it's important that you highlight, right? This is a wild card. And so there's no sort
Mhm.
of like standard profile for what those kids look
Right.
look like, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's a popular question. And I think it's important to address just very honestly and direct right now to our families is that these wildcard schools, like your Ivies, um, when you ask, like, what does my child need to do? You're likely going to hear back from a counselor, like, there's not a recipe,
Yeah.
right? There's not like a recipe for that at all. We see students admitted who are at the top in terms of scoring. And then I've had students admitted who were not, and so there's no way for myself to even say I guarantee this or that because we can't, just the data tells us that these schools are just so selective. We can't predict and we can't develop some kind of um, list of to do things to ensure your kiddo goes to an Ivy school. So if it's a wild card, we tell the kids, shoot your shot, do your best work, and then we're going to see what happens later, during when we're opening those decisions.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you
Mhm.
for, when I think I advertised this on TikTok and I told folks, I said, if you're looking for the blueprint for how to get into a selective school, this isn't it. This is kind of just navigating this process. And I said, it's a much more practical approach, right? Realistically, what do we need to do to get across the finish line?
Mhm.
So, Aimee, you've walked us through building out our list,
Mhm.
told us what we need, little mixture of these classes, those classes. Now that I have my list, what's next?
What's next? So let's go practical, like we mentioned. We have to know where to access these applications. So schools decide where they're going to make their applications available. So here in the Rio Grande Valley, our local university only uses Apply Texas. So my students at my campus will all have Apply Texas accounts, and they're going to make sure they submit their local university application through that platform. Um, However, the remaining or most of the other Texas universities are going to be found on Common App, right? So then students make themselves a Common App account, and they're going to add all the schools that are available on Common App on there. So they use the Common App platform to submit those applications. Also, more, if you're looking at anything like Georgetown, MIT, they have their own platform. They are not on Common App. You're not going to find them anywhere else. It's their website. You create an account with them, and then you're working on that. So it is possible for a student to have up to 3 platforms going at once with applications in each one. So that's important to note. Work smarter. If the school's available, let's say on Common App, and most of your schools are on Common App, well, that's where we're going to do the bulk of them, because we don't want to waste time on other platforms when you already have a Common App account, if that makes sense. So wherever most of the applications are available, let's add them all on that platform, and then work with the ones that are not. So if MIT is a dream wild card for you, then you're going to have to make an MIT account and you're going to have to use their platform, right? And it is what it is. And so find out where the application is available is the first practical big step. Afterwards, once we're adding schools on a platform, so I'm going to use Common App because it is the most common. So I'm adding all these applications into my Common App account. I can start to see the requirements. So I can look under school information. So let's say I selected Texas A&M and I go under their information on Common App, I can see what's required. So there I can see what essays do I have to have prepared? Do they have short responses? Do I need letters of rec, and so on. So Common App itself can kind of help you keep track of all the things you should be prepping to finish that application. Similar, MIT, Georgetown, those might show you a list or a to-do or a check-off type thing. So utilize whatever the application platform is offering you as a resource to keep everything straight in terms of what do you have to work on and when are things due. So find the platform. It's going to inform you for the most part on what you need to submit.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think this is great information. And so just again to reiterate, right, I think apply Texas, right? And so, but I think the biggest takeaway is where are this, we have our list, where most of their applications, where can they be found? And so if the brunt of them are on the Common App, let's utilize it, start there, because most of our applications are there. Let's utilize that platform and start there, and then look at also the lists, right? Telling us how we're doing, what we need to submit, what's pending, and then work from there and looking at do we need to use another platform? Are we applying again to Georgetown, MIT, that would require us to go through their own platform? Okay. Now, you talked about a list. You talked about all of the things, right? That I've got to submit. Where do we start then there? What do you want to tackle first, Aimee, for our students out there that, we got to get started on this?
So I love working on the big pieces first, personally, right? When I'm working with students, I think there's a lot to say about feeling like that huge load off your shoulders when you take care of a really big task. And the same goes with this process. So we start, when I say we, I just talk about my work and how I work with students. We actually start junior year with the personal statement. However, there's a lot of seniors who are like, I'm starting now. It is what it is, right? Like time already passed. We're going to have to start. So as soon as possible, we're looking at those prompts and selecting the one that resonates with us. So on Common App, I believe it's 7 prompts. On Apply Texas, there's 2. So for students in Texas, specifically, I like to use topic A on Apply Texas as a starting point where it talks about opportunities or challenges. And so when the student drafts that, it becomes this malleable narrative where I can edit it to fit maybe a prompt on a different platform, because that tends to be popular. We tend to see that as a general question on several platforms, is to either talk about a challenge or talk about an opportunity. Who are you because you went through that, and you came out at the end of it learning something about yourself. So personally, for students in Texas, I like to start with topic A and then go from there if we need more essays or if there are other prompts to answer for a college specifically. But just know for a student in Texas who's just using Common App, you're not using Apply Texas. So your schools are all taking these 7 prompts. There's a lot of freedom there. So if you do have a college counselor or a Go Center advisor at your school, that's a great starting point if you're not sure how to start this essay. Use those resources, right? These are the things that, like I said, my story, high school Aimee would have loved to have that one person on that one lab to just go in and ask for help. So use the resources is the big push I have. I say it to my students, communicate with me, tell me what's going on, let me know where you're confused. So I encourage high school students to do the same within their high schools. Find that individual who's tasked with helping you through this process. So if it's your academic counselor, knowing full well that you're maybe in a large school and they have hundreds of students, make the appointment. Find out, how do I get an appointment with my academic counselor, and make the appointment and get that process started with that individual who can help you. And so the personal statement is exactly what it sounds like. It's a narrative, it's personal, it's about you. So it's not a broad generic essay where I'm just kind of bragging on what I did in high school. I'm telling a story that's unique to me and sharing an insight about myself so that recruiter, whoever's reading my file, gets to know me on another level, gets to know me beyond my transcript, beyond the academic resume, even beyond what some of the teachers say about me in my letters of rec. And that's my opportunity. So we're not spitting facts out to them. We're telling a story is what we're doing in that essay.
Yeah, I love that. You know, and just for students or parents, or students primarily that might be watching this, reminding them, you know, you mentioned that the Apply Texas has 2 prompts. You suggest starting with prompt A and then building from there. I like the advice of using that prompt because you could probably, right, tailor it to then maybe one of the other prompts if you've got some applications on the Common App. But you mentioned that the Common App has 7 prompts, right? And just a reminder for our students, you're not responding to all 7 prompts.
No,
Yeah.
just one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for, I imagine students that see the prompts and like, oh my God, right? And
Right.
where do I even get started? And so I love the advice about starting with A. And I love how you sort of framed it. What is it that we're trying to say? And so, yes, this is some insight into that you're not going to find probably anywhere else. You're not going to find in your list of activities or the letters of recommendation. I always tell students and recommend that, or remind them that this is an opportunity. They're likely not going to talk to somebody from the universe. They're not going to have an interview. And so this is sort of, you're having this conversation, you're telling them, right, offering this insight about yourself. One thing that I also wanted to share, because I see it, and I'm sure you see it, and if you want to speak to this, you can. But where students start talking about a family member, right, that has sort of influenced them or had an impact on them, and I always remind students, right, it's great that you had that influence. Don't make it about them, right? Talk
Right.
about the impact they had on you,
Right.
because they're not trying to admit mom, they're not trying to admit
No.
dad, or a coach or a mentor. You want them to admit you. And so, focusing in, right, on that, are there any
Yeah.
specific stories or experiences that you had around the prompts and the essays that maybe you can share that might offer some insight for our listeners out there?
Right. Yes. So, great one you brought up now, and I'm going to get to that one as well. So when I talk to my students about topic A, which I say is very malleable, students can kind of edit it depending on what they're working on. Topic A on Apply Texas is asking students to talk about either opportunities or challenges they have faced, kind of how it's made them who they are now. That's the essential prompt right there. And so we just start talking about, who are you? And we talk about values. We talk about characteristics. We talk about traits. And so the student is reflecting on themselves first. Right. So if I'm brainstorming this, I start making a list and I start talking about all these positive traits that describe me, or all these things that I value in my life. Right. So positive traits could be dedicated. Right. I'm going to skip hardworking because everybody likes to write that down. Right. But I would say dedicated. I might put honesty. I value honesty. Right. So I'm going to start a list like that, right? Or I could also go by traits, which are they're kind of go hand in hand, which is why I say both. I can talk about the type of person I feel I am and what those strengths are, and I can make that kind of list maybe, just to get my thoughts going. And then I reflect back on how can I connect a story because it's the narrative. How do I connect a moment in my life that reflects any of these values or characters that I feel strongly about? Um, so I've had students write various essays, all very different and unique. But at the end of the day, I need to be able to read that essay and pull from it what maybe their strengths are, or what they value in their own life. Like that needs to be evident because we want these recruiters reading your file to imagine those qualities being used on their own campuses. We want to make sure that they see that and that they can picture it or imagine it at their school. So, if I'm writing a personal narrative where I talk about how I value honesty and I'm going to tell you the story and it's going to, you're going to learn about maybe an opportunity or challenge that I worked through that's really reflective of how I value honesty in my own life, then that recruiter is going to see that about me, right? And they're going to want to see this positive value or trait at their campus. So at the end of the day, that's what we want. We don't want to be stuck in just talking about the opportunity and the challenge for the whole essay and never be reflective. So this story is also consistent or also consists of not only just telling the story, but also what is that reflective piece there that you're making sure that the reader leaves with. They have this idea about the kind of person you are, right? And so there's all kinds of writers. You don't have to be the most beautiful creative writer to be able to write this essay. So it's like one thing I want to make very clear. I've worked with students who write just a very direct personal narrative. It gets the pieces across. They'll tell me I'm not creative. This is what I got. And it's their best work. We're good to go. We're going to use that essay. And then you have students who love reading, writing. They're readers. They think this way. They'll write you an essay with this beautiful metaphor running through the whole thing. As long as it gets the job done, we're answering the prompt. We're being reflective in the essay. We're showing how either we've changed or grown or, whatever the prompt is asking us for. Then we're good. We're okay. So essays look different. Depends on who's writing it. Depends on how they're reflecting on their experience, right? That's going to determine what the essay sounds like at the end of the day. Just one thing I like to note too on that is that always a positive spin. So I can talk about a challenge that maybe was really difficult for me to work through in my life, but I want to make sure that in my reflection, I talk about how I grew or how I learned from it, right? So we want to make sure that that's what the recruiter is learning about me. They're learning about what I went through, how I grew from it or changed or learned, right? And I'm making sure that I'm also sharing that in my essay. And so that's the one essay I like to work through with my students. And then comes the one where you mentioned, like sometimes there's a short response asking them to talk about a person they respect or someone important in their lives, right? And I'm already going to say it now. A&M included this one already. Short response. A&M wants to know who's this influential person in your life. And so the first thing we talk about when I have a student in front of me and we're talking about this prompt is, okay, who are you thinking about writing, right? Who are you thinking about? Like, who is this going to be about? So, right, it's going to be about grandma. Okay. Let's think about moments in your life where grandma was very influential. What have you learned from her? What's something you have learned from grandma? And then we'll talk about that lesson. Well, grandma taught me this, taught me that. Great. Can we start reflecting on moments when you were around grandma that you saw her live that trait or live, what it is you learned? Beautiful. But then when we write it, I want to hear this much about grandma and this much about you reflecting those values or whatever it is grandma taught you, right? Because like you said, grandma is not applying you. You are. So yeah, we want to make sure we don't get stuck in showcasing others when the job is to make sure we're showcasing ourselves in the process.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure we talked about that, and one other thing, because I've seen this with students that I've worked with and parents,
Mhm.
concern that I don't have a sob story. Like my
Mm,
story isn't sad. My story needs to
yeah.
be sad. And I don't know where they get that from.
Mhm.
But what advice do you give somebody like that that's thinking like, well, I don't
Yeah.
have a sob story. What do I do?
Right. Oh, it's a common question. And I've had students tell me, thank goodness I haven't gone through anything so sad, but like, what now? I don't have this kind of story to tell. Um, so we look at the opportunity side of it too, right? So I tell my students, okay, well, you're having trouble reflecting or thinking on like what's the challenge you worked through. What are some really cool things that have happened in your life? And we just make a list. It can be the smallest thing, maybe in the moment, to like, wow, you won some kind of award at some point in high school. And then we start brainstorming from there. And like I said, it could be the smallest thing, but to you, it was an opportunity that kind of changed like the trajectory of your life in that moment. It totally can be that. Right. And so it's your story to tell. So if to me this opportunity that to someone else seems this big made this big change, um, I could tell that story because it's about me. It's my personal statement. So we can talk about just the smallest little opportunity that came up, just like the most wonderful opportunity. And so we reflect on those. We talk about what they highlight, what they showcase about them as individuals, these opportunities that they came across, and then maybe how they've played a role in who they are as a person now. And that sometimes that does get the ball rolling, and then we can start to figure out what story we're going to tell from there. So yeah, yes, come across that many times. Like, I don't know what to tell. I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we start reflecting on other things, like what are some positive things we can talk about?
I love that. Thank you. Okay. So we've spent some time talking about our essays.
Mhm.
Where do you want to go next?
So a big part of the process is also talking to teachers around you, whose help you might need. So some colleges will require teacher letters of rec, and your application is incomplete without these letters. And some schools may say optional, and some may say none at all. So again, like if I'm on Common App, I can check the college information for each school I'm applying to, and I can see what colleges require the letters, what colleges say they're optional, and what colleges say they won't look at any letters. So I can determine that on the platform I'm applying on, or I can just look on the admissions page for that college and see what's required there too. Um, so you might need some teachers to support your application. If that's the case, we start early, right? So we want to start asking in August and September to give your teachers plenty of time to actually generate a positive quality letter. Um, so there's so many teachers, like so much love for these wonderful teachers who will take a last minute request and they'll do the best they can to help a student out. But unfortunately, we didn't give them the opportunity to be able to actually draft it out with time. And that's what we want to do. Like, A, we don't want to put a teacher in that kind of position. Um, and B, you want letters turned in about you to be reflective of you in the best light, right? So we want to make sure we're doing that. Um, you can approach a teacher either way. I've had students they say they're very brave. They are social, a little braver, and they will go right up to a teacher face to face and ask if they will support them in writing the letter of rec for their college applications. Maybe if you're a little more shy, not, you'll lose your words maybe. Um, an email is perfectly adequate as long as you follow up. So if you email a teacher a nice, respectful letter on how you need their support for letters of rec, how you believe they're going to be one of the best voices to tell those qualities about you and their experiences with you in the classroom. Ask your question there, and you can follow up maybe a few days later. Just make sure they got the email and see what's going on. So you will need to ask teachers if your schools require letters of recommendation. And it's important to note what kind of letters. So if I'm going into, if I'm applying to MIT, for example, they require a STEM letter, so math or science, and a letter from the humanities. So that's English, social studies, and so on. So I need to be very strategic about who I ask in those situations. So being clear on if a letter of rec is required and if they're specifying what kind of teacher needs to write those letters.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think that's important, right? Thinking about, the timing,
Mhm.
thinking about strategically, right? And paying very close attention to, does the school require letters of recommendation? Does it not? Does it absolutely not, accept them? But then are there specifics around who I should ask or particular subject matter? So I
Correct.
think absolutely thinking about all of those things. One thing that also I wanted to remind students of, because I find, like, especially if you are, top 10%, or those students tend to have the same teachers, and those
Hmm.
teachers tend to get bombarded with requests for
Right.
letters of
Right.
recommendation. Yeah, and so getting to them early, so that, one, you're sort of beating the rush, but then two, you're, like you said, giving them time
Yes.
to draft a letter. I'll even suggest to students, if there's this particular, if it's a sponsor or somebody that was a coach or somebody, that
Mhm.
even giving them some, um sort of like maybe things that they want to highlight about the student, or some experience that they had. Maybe they were, like I said, a sponsor or coach. Because sometimes I know for me, as a if I'm writing letters for grad school, I'll often tell my students, I'll ask them for a resume, but I'll often ask them, like, is there something you'd like me to highlight? Is there a particular skill or characteristic? You talked about, when crafting your personal statements, right, your values, your interests, things like that. And so I'll often ask my students, right, is there something you want me to highlight? And then I can tailor the letter around those things, and really mention, or just focus in on those things. Um, so I think, I thank you for reminding us about the letters of recommendation, thinking strategically about them, but also paying attention to the schools, and what are the schools looking for of the student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And saying this, let's not do this, kiddos, but um, we don't want to ask for like 5 letters of rec on a whim. And these teachers generate these letters for you. And at the end of the day, you tell them, never mind. Um, that was time that they took away from either a conference period or a weekend to write you a letter. So let's be very strategic about who we ask, so that we're not asking more of some of these teachers who are probably really stretched thin already.
I love that. Thank you. We've got about 12 to 13 minutes, Aimee, and I know one of the biggest pieces, and certainly what's on the minds of a lot of, if not the students, certainly the parents, is
Mhm.
financial aid.
Mhm.
And last year, the FAFSA changed. It created a lot of headaches for folks. um, and so, what what do you want to tell us? What do we need to know? Uh, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Well, if people follow RGB Educator, they'll see I tried to have a sense of humor about it all last cycle. But okay, so essentially, our Department of Education needed to make changes. We're told to make changes. They attempted to meet their deadline last school year or last cycle. And they kind of did. They were soft launching when they were not ready to soft launch, essentially causing many, many delays and errors for families. And so unfortunately, we still have families in September trying to straighten things out. We did have, and this is just being honest and transparent, right? So our families understand what happened and what's happening now. I've had conversations with some recruiters who have told me they lost prospective students because they could not generate an 8 letter yet, while another college or university found a way to do so. So it was difficult for everyone. It was difficult for our families, especially our low income families who are dependent on FAFSA. Um, it was difficult, or it is still difficult for our IAGs, our institutions of higher education, because their financial aid offices are scrambling right now to kind of plug holes and fix the problem however they best can. And then you have people like myself on the high school end supporting students, frustrated when I didn't have answers. Right. So that was last year's experience. And those of us who worked through it, just, we just kind of like worked with whatever grit we could pull together and like kept going. This school year, what's been announced by the Department of Education is that it will launch December 1st. We're being told it will be fixed and ready, and I'm air quoting because this is what we were told last year as well, plenty of times. There are some students that will have the opportunity to submit October 1st. However, they're going to be selective. So the Department of Education is going to be partnering with some CBOs, like local community-based organizations, to like test launch and allow those students to submit. The participants in this, they're going to be willing participants who know they might end up with errors and whatnot. Then the Department of Education says that they will clean up these errors, work through them, fix things so that when they launch to everyone December 1st, we shouldn't be facing those errors anymore or those hiccups. So the hope is that it is ready December 1st and that all our families who qualify for FAFSA will be able to submit a financial aid application on December 1st or after that. So it's important for families to understand what they qualify for. So that's like a big one. So now that I've already set that up, and we're all going to cross our fingers and hope that everything works out December 1. Families can check on the FAFSA.gov website to make sure their student qualifies. Essentially, and just on like a blanket here, essentially it's any students born in the US, they're going to qualify for FAFSA. Students who have spent some time in the US, and there's some very specific, they're just bulleted items that tell you if you qualify. If you're not born in the US, but you've been here a while, you can see that list on FAFSA.gov to make sure you qualify. And so if you're landing in one of those qualifications, or you were born in the US, you know you're going to do a FAFSA. For students in, I'm going to speak to Texas first, who were raised in Texas, have the option of doing a TASFA. So they won't qualify for FAFSA, but they will complete a TASFA, and that's the Texas application. The aid comes from the state, and the student only does one. So if I qualify for FAFSA, I need to do the FAFSA. If I do not qualify for FAFSA, I do TASFA. I don't do both. I don't qualify for both. It's one or the other. An additional one, so those are two terms, right? FAFSA is our financial aid from the Department of Education. It's that platform. TASFA is different. It's local to Texas. Some other states in the country might have something very similar to it. That's different, right? So I have these two different applications. There's also something called the CSS profile. And the CSS profile is available on College Board. So students, it's where you log in to check your AP scores. It's where you log in to access the SAT suite and register for the SAT. That's College Board. You get into College Board and you access the CSS profile. So first I'm going to check, is my school a CSS school? Typically, these are, some of our more competitive private colleges tend to be on that list. So if you're applying Ivy, chances are you have a CSS school, or a very competitive private college in the country, they might be on there as well. So you want to find out, is my school a CSS school? And if so, when do they want me to submit by? What's that deadline? So I could potentially fill out a FAFSA and the CSS, or the TASFA and the CSS. I could potentially be doing that kind of combo there. The CSS is way more thorough. The schools are looking to see how they can spend some of their own funding, right? So they're asking all kinds of questions about your home, about the vehicles you own, about this, that. You're just going to have to make sure you have all your tax documents, things in front of you to be able to answer this very thorough application on the college, on the College Board website. That's CSS profile.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for laying that out for us, and being, I think you did a great job kind of just walking us through sort of the different options. Again, you were going to either do the FAFSA or the TASFA. Right? You're not going to do both, one or the other, but
Right.
there is a good, if you're applying to some of our more competitive, the Ivy League type schools, there's a good chance you're going to have to do either the FAFSA, the TASFA, and the CSS profile.
Correct.
Okay. One thing that I would like to note, and I only know this more recently because I I reached out to a local financial aid office, because every once in a while there are parents or families that are like, well, we make too much money, we're not going to do the FAFSA.
Mhm.
Um, but what was relayed to me, from a financial aid official was, you may not, you may think, or you may not be required, it's not necessarily required to complete it, but a lot of universities will use that information to determine grant eligibility or eligibility for more program specific funding and opportunities. And so just because you think, oh, well, we make way too much money, we're not going to
Right.
qualify, it doesn't mean you may not qualify for something else. And so I just want to remind our parents that, um, I would encourage them to complete it, when that time comes. Um,
Definitely. And there are some schools that require a FAFSA regardless. So
mm,
you might be applying to a school that's going to ask you to turn it in, even if you feel you're not qualified. You're not going to qualify for any federal aid. And like you're saying, and what that financial aid specialist filled you in on is it's so true. Some of our families just we really don't know, right? Unless we submit it
mhm,
and see if we are eligible for any other kind of funding. But the school wants to see a FAFSA first, right?
right.
So yes, even if you think you don't qualify, highly encouraged to submit anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. Aimee, as we sort of bring things to a close here, I do want to remind our viewers that if what we'll do is we'll share the complete video, make sure to have all of the links and any sorts of resources. Certainly
Mhm.
everything that we've mentioned here, plus anything else that you think would be helpful to families,
Mhm.
including our own contact information. And then what I'll also do is I'll probably chop our video up to so that, where we talked about the specific areas, so there'd be shorter videos that we can make more available through different platforms to really get it out there. But before we go, any final thoughts or anything else that we're missing, that parents and students should be thinking about as they're working on their college applications?
Sure. So there's more work to do after submitting the app. I'm going to submit my applications. I'm going to work on my financial aid application, whether it's a FAFSA or TASPA, DSS profile. But I should also be searching for scholarship opportunities as well. So when we're talking about financing college, we're talking about the student does a lot of the research too, right? It's not just a FAFSA where mom or dad are probably doing the majority of the filling in. You also have to put in the legwork to see what opportunities are available to you. So you can use search engines on a national level, like scholarships.com or Going Merry, right? And that's where you just make an account with your personal email and you're able to filter through all kinds of scholarship opportunities available on the national scale. But also stay connected with, I would say, the counseling department. Traditionally, they're the ones that take care of it. But whatever the local scholarship opportunities are, make sure you know where to find that information. Whether it's your actual academic counselor or you have a college counselor on your high school campus or a facilitator in the career center, they're all called different centers, career center, go center, whatever they call it. But find that person, find their resources. Like, do they post something on your school's website and update it regularly? Do they have a Google Classroom you can join? Right? Is there something you can sign up for where they send reminders out so that you know when those local opportunities come up? Right? And so you're submitting applications at the national level, you're submitting scholarship applications at the local level, and you're making sure you complete the scholarship section for every university you apply to. And so this way you've covered all your bases. And you know that if there's any funding available that you qualify for, you've put the work in, right? And then so now we wait in the spring to see what rolls in as a result of that work, right? But the scholarships don't just show up. They don't just like poof, thin air. Like we have to put the work, we have to put the work in. Yeah. Because the most popular question I get in spring from parents is scholarship, right? Has my child submitted scholarships? Do they know where to look? And the answer is always yes, because I make sure the students know where to go find this information. But the student does have to put the work in. So seniors, like you're ready to do that work in the spring. It's not over after you hit submit. Now we got to look for the money, right? So we have to make sure we're doing that work too.
Thank you. I
Mhm.
think that's also really important for those that are applying and parents, and because I think like I said earlier, everybody's thinking about the price tag,
Mhm.
and so doing everything they can to help themselves, I think is very important. Um, Aimee, thank you. Thank you for your time today. I do want to remind people that Aimee is available to work with families, as am I, and this work is important to us. We want to make sure that folks are informed, that our students out there are proactive and aren't waiting till with deadlines coming up, well,
Mhm.
now I should work on it. No, start working on it, get this stuff together. We hope that this has been helpful for you all. Aimee, any final words?
I always say my favorite thing to leave conversations with is to be a self advocate. You know, students, if you need help, seek the help. Start at your high school, work from there. Who are the adults who are supposed to support you in this process? Find out who they are and make the appointments, show up to their offices, so that you get the support you need to submit things on time, and complete, making sure the application's complete, good to go, and hitting submit on those. So advocate for yourself. The resources are there. The internet's been around for a long time now. So be an advocate for yourself, right? Like find the information and go ask questions and find the people who are supposed to help you in this process and build connections with those people.
Absolutely. Aimee, thank you for your time this evening. And thank you for those of you that are tuning in. We appreciate it, and best of luck to everyone out there.